What is up, everybody? My name is Kyle Matovcik. I am the host of the In Liberty and Health podcast, where we talk all things liberty, health, and wellness, and beyond. My hope is to encourage and spread the message of liberty and physical and mental well-being. I hope you enjoy all the topics we talk about with our guests. We're on all major streaming platforms, so please sit back, relax, and enjoy.
Man, I'm doing as good as anyone can do getting buried by his 13-year-old son on leg day.
I'm not going to apologize for not being on this podcast because I got to go see Metallica. So if that's a problem, kiss my ass.
Okay?
All right.
All right, everybody, you know her, you love her, and I don't think the globalists or Twitter or YouTube or really anybody else likes her all that much, but all like the non-lizard people really like her. Courtenay Turner is back for her third appearance. I'm very excited to talk to her, and there's plenty of good stuff to cover. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, thanks. There's definitely a group of people who don't seem to like me very much.
Your Twitter kind of came by surprise because it's not like you ever posted anything that was provocative or seemingly that would really jerk the algorithm all that much. But then all of a sudden it was just poof.
Out of nowhere. And and I tried to make several other accounts because people are like, I guess I could get a VPN and that might, I don't know. Now that I've just given away my secret, I don't know. but yeah, they were, I mean, even different numbers, they were just on to me. But they lied because their claim was that it was COVID misinformation. That's what they claimed they booted me for. But I actually wasn't talking about COVID at all. I was actually talking about polio. I was responding to Monica Perez. And, she had asked a question about polio and, the pharmaceutical remedies. And, I had responded and I sent a clip to, I haven't released his podcast, but I did 2 episodes with Sebastian Powell, who does really fantastic deep dives on, the medical industry and in general. He does some really fantastic research. And I put a link to his, and yeah, I don't know, that was it. That was it for me.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. I'm kind of surprised I ever got booted off Twitter for medical misinformation because to my credit, I always do put studies and I usually cite my sources when it comes to talking about COVID. So I'm usually pretty, hammer on
I don't feel like they care about that. I mean, this was a linked source. I had a link to an article that was, yeah.
It just wasn't the approved opinion.
Exactly. Yeah. That was the problem.
Yeah. It's really bizarre to me because I think you and I were kind of talking about this a little bit more when we were texting back and forth. They control so much of the dialect, and I heard you talk about this on another episode too, where basically it's like you have this small window of allowable opinion, and especially this really got amped up over the last 6 years, where you can only have a conversation within this small window, and when you deviate outside of it, then you're either one way or the other. The Overton window is so narrow in our current political dialogue, and I don't like that because I'm a pretty open-minded person. I'm patient. I can talk to people that completely disagree with me in either direction and get along with them perfectly fine. But if you do this online, then the tensions are so much higher and the stakes are higher too, because you can just get depersoned off these platforms.
Well, I think there's actually a really conscious effort and a very coordinated effort to keep people polarized. And I don't think it's just online. I think online it's just much more visible. But when you keep people polarized, I think it's a dialectical trap, and it is a way to create. I'm actually about to release this podcast too, but we talked a lot about the dividing line, Plato's dividing line. When you think about the allegory of the cave and the intelligible realm, the unintelligible realm, and then the dividing line. I think that's a lot of what they try to do, because when you have these two polar opposites, then they essentially negate each other, and then it's a no-win zone. So you can have nuances, you can have a real genuine discourse, and that's really what they want, because that's how they achieve the divide and conquer model.
Yeah, and that's kind of the way they seem to like it, is to have this kind of gridlock where you have okay groomer on one side, and then cry more lib on the other side. And it's, or well, actually there's about the same sides, but you kind of know what I'm saying. Like, either you're a Nazi or you're a complete and total fascist, right? There's no room in between. And people don't like to sit down and have conversations about delicate topics that we can generally kind of come to some kind of consensus to through a conversation. But I think what you say is completely correct, that it is basically those in control really want this to be as polarizing as possible, so that way that never happens.
Yeah, they want it as polarized as possible so that essentially both sides negate each other. That this is how you create that kind of destruction. Because if people were to really have discourse and they were to deal with nuances, then you might come to some sort of agreement. You might find that you actually have more in common than you realize. You might find that rather than compromising, which is what they want compromising, which is really conciliation, and then one side wins, and then it essentially folds over and the dialectic progresses and everything moves left. And that's what they want, as opposed to a really genuine discourse that might bring out of the box solutions. That's not what they want. They want this to be, I mean, I think they want to dehumanize things as much as possible, which is why online is where so much of the discourse is, because people are so atomized and they are so dehumanized, depersonalized, and that's exactly what they want. So
yeah, and it's such a shame, because I think the last time you were on, we were kind of talking about kind of what makes us human and why it's so important to have personal connections with people, because it's so much harder to deperson people or even like talk bad to people when you know this person personally. And when you spend time with them, like the people I work with, we'll talk politics and stuff like that. And I disagree with them on a lot of stuff, but we can kind of work towards a conclusion that we both kind of see as a viable thing. And or at least agree on what's better than we have now. And there's no room for that on Twitter, especially not in 140 characters, or on Facebook, or and then if you look at a lot of the titles and videos that people put out, typically they're clickbait, and it's just to ratchet up tensions rather than say, hey, this is what this is, and have a more nuanced breakdown that actually informs people so they can kind of get a better idea of what they're discussing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think definitely we did talk about this last time. When you're in person, people, the things that people would say online, most people would not say face to face when they're staring someone in the eye. That's just, that's just human nature. They feel very emboldened, and they're able to, they suddenly have the confidence that they wouldn't have if they were having an interpersonal experience. But I think more than that, it does just dilute the discussion, because it becomes so much easier to just have an attack that wouldn't necessarily seem like an attack, but because it's condensed into 140 characters, it will feel that way. It's the back and forth. Whereas if you were to really explain what it is you're saying and give the justification behind it. And it's interesting that, because when I think about this, I part of what I liked about Twitter was that I could essentially put out my short articles, and but people would say, okay, break this down, make it a tweet. And so it's you because people apparently can't read more than 140 characters. I don't know what's up with that, right. But so they can read it though. If you and I have done this, I've done maybe 30 tweets, and it'll be broken down into 140 character segments. And somehow that seems to be more palatable and more digestible for people. So that's the benefit of it. But it is really hard to have a genuine discussion or genuine argument with anything that is condensed like that. Then you're just spitting, back and forth. You just verbal bullets, if you will. I was going to say bullets, and I was like, well, I don't want to say that, but verbal bullets, or written bullets.
No, that's really what it feels like on Twitter, especially when you start getting into it with people. And my rule of thumb, If I know the person, I'll engage with them for a while. If I don't know you, then you get about 2 or 3 tweets. And if I just see you're not going to move or you're not going to engage in good faith, you get blocked.
Yeah, right.
That was kind of my policy. And I'm a very forgiving and patient person, but I'm just not going to put up with bullshit. And if I see that you're full of shit, then sorry, done, blocked.
I think I must have been so shadow banned that I was kind of in an echo chamber. I mean, people talk about how toxic it is, and I really didn't get a whole lot. I mean, every now and then I would get some trolls, and it didn't really happen that often, though, to be very honest. Mostly it was people within like-minded communities or reaching out to people who had, podcast people. Yeah, it was more of that kind of a resource for me and a way to share research, really. That's really most of what I obviously I shared my podcast, and I would share research that I had collected. And but I guess they didn't like the research that I was finding. So there goes that.
Yeah. Well,
But,
once again, you were off the plane and you didn't have the allowable opinion, so therefore they kind of had to come after you and shut that shit down.
Yeah.
Do you have anything you want to add there? Sorry.
No dissenting opinions allowed, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, unfortunately not. The one thing I was texting you about earlier, and I'm really curious your opinion on this, because I feel like not a lot of people talk about the potential downsides of Bitcoin. And I don't want to say it's a psyop, but at the same time, it's kind of like this is a digital currency that you cannot hold in your hands. It's on a computer, and yeah, people talk about cold wallets and stuff like this, but okay, what happens if the power grid goes down? And this could just be me being, the old man shakes fists at sky. Now you see BlackRock buying into Coinbase, which is, I think, probably one of the larger apps that people use.
And they're going to use Aladdin in order, as the
Okay.
yeah.
So I guess real quick, can you elaborate on who and what BlackRock is? I think we may have tapped on this one of the previous shows, and then
Sure.
kind of go into your thoughts on Bitcoin.
Okay. So BlackRock is a asset management company, but the unique thing about BlackRock is that they kind of play both sides of the fence, that they're investment as well as asset management, which typically would be seen as kind of a conflict of interest, but for some reason it's perfectly fine for them. I'm I've been very aware of BlackRock because I actually went to school with the founders' kids. So, the oldest one was my year, then there's a middle one, and then the youngest was actually my sister's year. So
okay, how far back did their knees go? Were they like lizard people, or were they normal?
I'm sorry, how far back?
How far back did their knees go? Were they like lizard people, or were they normal people?
That I have no idea. Yeah, no, I can't speak to anything that in that regard, but yeah, so I remember kind of when it was the early stages, and it started out as a I'm not sure if I 100% remember this, but there was like a partnership with Blackstone, and they have since, I think, separated. But so BlackRock, the thing that really concerned me more recently was that Trump had appointed them to essentially manage the Treasury and to buy down the federal debt. And so they were essentially became like managers of the Federal Reserve. And I don't know, to me, that just seemed like supposedly it's supposed to be federal. I know the Federal Reserve is actually a private company, but that's a whole separate conversation. So it did seem, though, like it's a bit of a conflict of interest. And they justified it like they're just asset managers, they'll get their typical 1%. But to me, it did indicate that they were now very invested, and they would have access to federal, taxpayer dollars, which doesn't seem, it raises some questions. I think people should be asking questions about it. It just doesn't seem quite kosher to me. He is, so Larry Fink is on the board of the World Economic Forum. He had made several comments about how, it's about it's about changing behavior. So this is, a lot of the policy, the economic policy is intended to change individual behavior.
Right.
And they want to change this individual behavior, driving it towards the ESGs. The ESG, for those who don't know, I'm not going to go into a whole thing. We can, but just to make it fairly quick for right now, it is essentially a Trojan horse for a social credit system that will come by way of the quote unquote carbon credit system. And it really is a Trojan horse. That's what it's a scam. It is a huge scam. So, but that's they're big drivers of this, and they're buying up, tons of single family homes. That whole slogan, you'll own nothing and you'll be happy. They are largely invested. They're one of the largest, investment in asset manager in the world. So it's essentially, and they own kind of everything. I don't want to be quoted as saying it's like, oh no, it's not everything. They own a large majority of corporations, and it's BlackRock, it is Vanguard, and State Street, I would say, are kind of the top three that own most of the corporations in the world. Mm-hmm. And the Vanguard owns a very large percentage of BlackRock, so does State Street. And when you go, so BlackRock is a public company, so you can, dig into it fairly easily, whatever is not, hidden, and whatever that they haven't, moved into shells and whatnot, you can really see. But Vanguard is private, but when you dig a little bit deeper into Vanguard, you see that it does seem to be majority owned by the 13 families. Mm-hmm. They're known as the office families. So yeah, so it's kind of a monopoly, which is we have this illusion that we have all these independent corporations, which really are not all that independent, because we see how much they get bailed out, and they get, incentives and help and assistance and, connections to the government, and now to all these NGOs, which is, I think in some ways much scarier, because we're now not only seeing a, fascist takeover nationally, but we're seeing kind of globally. It's part of how they're able to execute this global fascist takeover. So that's a little bit about BlackRock, and BlackRock is a rabbit hole. I actually started to write an article on it, and it was like, I could do a book. BlackRock is definitely a very, very deep dive, and I'm happy to do more on that, but I'll tell you some of my thoughts on Bitcoin. So I've always been a little bit skeptical of Bitcoin, and usually when I tell people that I'm not like all gung-ho about it, the response I get is that I don't understand the math behind it. I'm like, no.
I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah.
And my reaction is, well, that's not condescending at all. But actually, I do understand the math behind it. And I also understand that anything that has a mathematical model can also be reverse engineered. So if there's a mathematical model to code it, then you can also, this is how hacking works, right? For instance, so I understand that it's very difficult, and it might not be, worthwhile for, let's say, the government to hack into every person's, or even criminals to go and hack into every single person's, because of the way the blockchain works, it does build on each other, and there's so many steps. But what I do know is it is possible, contrary to belief. There's definitely a possibility of hacking. We saw that wasn't that couple who they hacked in and stole like over $1 million or something. I think it was in California. I don't remember the details of it, but I remember it was a big story, because they basically stole a bunch of crypto, and so it is possible, but it's not possible if you have when you were talking about like the cold wallet, and that's anything that's on a hard drive. Obviously you own that. That's that's definitely going to be a lot safer. But of course, if there's an EMP attack and everything gets wiped out, anything that's on, it's on the hard drive, great, but then I don't, if everything's if the systems are wiped out, then I don't know about that. And that is a very real possibility. But more than any of that, what I do know is the global elite documents say their goal is to create a global digital currency.
CBDC.
Yeah, and they've already started working on it. And they're, I actually just had a conversation with my bankers the other day, and they were saying how, so they were, because I was talking about, I'm on a platform, it's called Rockfin, and they're great, in terms of free speech. You can really see the difference between a free speech platform and a censored platform, because I've been on there for a very short period of time, and I've, it's not like a huge following by other people's standards, but to me, it's growing pretty quickly, and it's growing very steadily, and it's daily growing. So, it says to me that when the chains are, that's how free market works, right? So people want to find the information, they go and find it. And I really do appreciate that. But the way that they pay is in crypto. So I was a little bit concerned, it's RAE, which can be converted into Ethereum, which I hear is one of the, better ones for a lot of reasons. I'm not like a crypto expert, so, this is not advice to anybody. I certainly do not claim to be I'm not a financial expert. I'm definitely not a crypto expert. But what I will say is I think it's a better thing to transfer in interim. I don't think it's an investment piece, just because. So where I was going with that with my, I was talking about, because I was saying how I had some concerns and I wanted to know their advice. And the big thing they did tell me was that as of 2023, they're looking to tax it. And I think that that's how the elites are going to start, because once they can tax something, they have a lot more control and leverage over regulating it, and controlling it, essentially. And I think that's going to be their first step, is, taxing it. And if you read all the white paper documents, that's really what they say. They want to take us into a cashless society where they can put us under a global UBI, and that's tied to an AI run social credit carbon credit system. And I do think that these digital currencies are the key to doing that. And I think that what they're going to try and do, I think they've already done it in China, where, they consolidate, so you can only have one type. And I think that's kind of where they're going. Like right now, they're allowing everybody to have the illusion of the diversity and being decentralized. And they're going to slowly regulate further and further so that they can start to consolidate. So that's my concern with Bitcoin. I don't think that it's a long-term kind of investment strategy. I don't trust it as that. I know I might get a lot of pushback on that, and I might be wrong. Who knows? But just knowing what the plans of the elites are, to me, it doesn't seem super stable in that regard. But I do think that it could be a good short-term kind of transfer leverage for people, because I think diversification is always a good strategy when it comes to really anything. I mean, but especially resources. You never want to have all your eggs in one basket. So those are some of my thoughts.
Whew. Yeah, there's quite a bit to unpack there. I guess we'll kind of start with Bitcoin there first. The thing that concerns me about crypto and Bitcoin is that, as you said, the desire of the globalists is to get a central bank digital currency. Okay, well, why would they want that? Because if they can tie that to your ESG or your social credit score, then it's much easier to control what you do, right? And it was kind of funny. You also mentioned behaviors and some of the information that people are seeking out. Okay.
What's going on, guys? We're going to take a quick break from the show to tell you about the show sponsors and the way that you can support me and this podcast. I'm sponsored by Axe and Sledge. Won't really focus in here, but right here in my hand, I have their The Grind, which is essential amino acids and hydration. Feel free to check it out. This is your mom's sweet peach. They have some awesome flavors and awesome names. They also have multivitamins, fat burners, creatine, beta-alanine, all sorts of different supplements to help you get all jacked and tan and help you become a person more full of liberty and health, as this show is about. So if you want to support me and support this podcast, then feel free to go to axandsledge.com and check out all their great supplements there, and use code Matovcik10. That's MATOVCIK 10 at checkout for a little discount, and to let them know I sent you their way. All right, everybody, thanks. Now back on to the show.
If they can have a central bank digital currency, and they can use YouTube algorithms or different video platform algorithms to show you certain things, and then your social credit score goes up. And then this, I don't want to throw too much at you, but so basically
You can. I'm fine with it. Whatever you want to throw at me.
So basically, if they can feed you this information, then you can comply because you're only seeing what's in the approved opinions, right? And then if you have a central bank digital currency, then you can manipulate people's behavior, especially through interest rates. And I was talking to my brother about this last night, but it's really interesting to consider interest rates because when you see a low interest rate environment, people don't save because their money doesn't grow. But in a higher interest rate environment, people save more because they see their money growing. Well, we've really introduced, such a bad situation for people like my age, right? Because I'll be 28 this year. People my age don't save because the interest rates have been 0% for so long. And this is so good for, the billionaire and the corporations because they can borrow money, same as cash. But then people like me who should save, we're discouraged from saving because inflation's higher than the interest rate. So therefore money decays faster than it actually grows. And now you raise basically a whole generation of people that now just make very, very poor decisions. They don't think about long-term and they don't save. And, once again, now we're starting to get pushed towards cryptos and pushed towards ESG. So there's so much manipulation with people. And I really like the one episode you did. I can't remember her name off the top of my head, but it was about, she talked a lot about MK Ultra and how porn and a lot of different stuff that was going on early on in the pandemic.
Rachel Wilson. Yeah.
I followed her on Twitter and I would love to have her on. So I think I'm going to arrange that sometime soon. But anyways, like a lot of this stuff seems like an extension of MK Ultra and basically manipulating people to certain behaviors. And they do it through different incentives that people don't necessarily think about.
You're saying that you think some of this financial behavior is driven by like an MK Ultra type of operation?
It definitely, to me, it seems like it's something that is encouraging, like it benefits the globalists in so many different ways and the heads of corporations because once again, they can borrow money same as cash. So that way they don't have to worry about paying out ridiculous amounts of loans. And the debt's all short term. So it's not like they can't just roll it over. And then it teaches younger people to rather than delay gratification, you can just spend your dollars right now. And you completely crush the middle class, right? Because now you have people that work the gig economy, so they're never going to have a retirement. They're going to have to work until they die. And then on top of that, you also have women.
And then they're going to be replaced by the robots. So
right. So I know that that's a whole lot, but I guess kind of take that from what you will.
Sure. So I don't know that there needs to be an MK Ultra style operation to, implement these results or, affect these results because that they really can do it just by policy and by, like you said, with, manipulating the interest rates, which they always do. I think they can do a lot of it through just propaganda. This kind of create it's culture creation. So in that regard, I mean, yes, like the CIA is very involved in culture creation, but I don't know that they need to, those are very elaborate kind of, usually there's a lot of, MK Ultra itself is, the operations typically are centered around a lot of drugging and trauma-based mind control. That it's very specific kind of weaponization. Whereas I think what's going on with the the economy, I do agree with you. They're trying to create this culture where there's many facets of it though. When you're trying, so I can kind of go through each thing there. So when you talk about the gig economy, this again goes it's kind of to this the political warfare approach, because they're going to prop up this gig economy, as you said, and this generation of gig economy, and then they're going to tear it down because they're going to be replaced by, this is theoretically, but they've said this. They've said that they want to have robots who will now take on these service type positions because the humans won't be needed and they can automate it. It'll be cheaper, and this will be a way that the robots can be effective in increasing the GDP and they can have an active role in that. And I think that's part of their transhuman kind of transition. So there's that aspect of it. And, obviously I can't predict the future. These are just plans. But this is what they have told us. So I do think that that's the political warfare game, is to prop up that kind of economy and then to tear it down, or tear down the people, essentially. And in terms of this, culture, people who aren't saving, that's absolutely benefiting. It's a fiat system, and I think they think that their time is kind of running out, and they are really ramping things up, and so they want to capitalize, pun intended on the word, but as much as possible in the time that they have, because I think they know that they are being exposed, and they're not sure how much they can get away with for how much longer. So I do think that's people keep saying we are winning, and it doesn't always feel that way. But I think the fact that they keep ramping up the plans is an indication of such. I think it does show that they know that. And it's just a matter of people not complying, people realizing what the game is and opting out of this game. So, yeah, I do think there are some other kinds of aspects in terms of when you say like an MK Ultra style. I do think that there are other types of psyops that are at play that definitely feed into the economy, and they definitely, feed into the younger generation. Your generation, then Gen Z, I would say, we're seeing the major push for a kind of a, like Brave New World type scenario where people are being numbed out. And one of the posts I did was about how they put psychedelics, push for psychedelic research into.
Okay, yeah, I'm really glad you're covering this, because I wanted to talk about this. This is something that's kind of been on my mind, but I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I'm just really glad you're getting to this. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So I'll just say quickly that, they're putting it into the defense bill. And I've gotten into many arguments with people, because people always point to, well, but, it's great for PTSD. And, my response is that, there's always, just because something can have an agenda that may be a nefarious agenda possibly attached, doesn't mean that there's no benefits to, the substance that they're promoting. It doesn't mean that, for instance, that psychedelics have never benefited anybody. And something can be, it can have both sides. I think I used the example of like a glass of wine, or more than a glass of wine. It has many benefits, and yet we know it's a toxin. Or yoga is another really great example. Yoga is essentially, it's a pagan worship practice. I don't think a lot of people know that. And I'm not saying that all people who practice yoga, I was a yoga teacher. I actually did taught partner yoga. I definitely didn't know that at the time. Most people don't know that. And it doesn't make them bad people. It doesn't mean that and it certainly does not mean yoga doesn't have any beneficial properties. We know yoga does wonderful things for the body, and can be incredibly healing for, the mind, the emotions, and physicality. So my only point in bringing it up is that I think it is very interesting that there's such a hard push for it. Firstly, I brought up PTSD because that's what the argument I keep hearing. Most of the research done on PTSD was done on soldiers. Now, that doesn't mean that it's not real. That doesn't mean that, there couldn't be beneficial properties to healing it with some of these psychedelic treatments. However, a lot of research that is done on soldiers does then get weaponized. And one of the really key examples of that would be shell shock therapy that was done under the Tavistock Institute of Human Relations. And they actually named the Tavistock, it was initially named the Wellington House, then the more like colloquial name for it was actually the British Propaganda Bureau. That was what it was called, because it was specifically designed to create propaganda to garner acquiescence for people to join the war, to engage in World War I, because it turns out that people actually don't want to go to war. It's not really their favorite thing to do. The idea shocking. I know, the notion that people might die and they might lose loved ones and lose family, and that innocent casualties might occur is just not all that appealing to people. So there really needed to be tremendous propaganda to get people on board. So that was initially what it's called, and then it changed to the Tavistock Clinic before it became Tavistock Institute of Human Relations. But the name Tavistock came from someone who was related to Rockefeller, who donated money for a building, a Tavistock building, so that they could specifically do shell shock research on soldiers. And that later became the foundation for trauma-based mind control. So that's an example of how some of these research can be weaponized. And so I'm not saying that that's the case here, but it just, looking through history, it is very possible. But I think it is important to look at the fact and ask questions as to why it's being put into a defense bill, because I always say when you put the D in front of it, it essentially gives them a black ops covert budget to do whatever they want. They get carte blanche, and they don't have to account for it or answer to it. It's ARPA was originally, it became DARPA because in order to have opacity, so they didn't have to be transparent. And that's essentially what putting the D in front of it does. So I think it is interesting that they're putting it into a defense bill. I don't know what it has anything to do with defense is, that to me does not make any sense at all. Not that these bills often make sense. That, we spend trillions of dollars on things that have nothing to do with the bill, with what the bill is supposedly purporting. But I think there's also another really interesting parallel to, they recently came out with all this revealing that SSRIs were founded on faulty research, because there was no evidence to support that there was any that causation of chemical imbalance to depression, anxiety, the things that SSRIs would then prescribed for. Then now they're coming out with this research in there. They're talking about that, but there was a huge media blitz about it, which is just kind of interesting because most of this research was done in the 90s and the early 2000s. I mean, there were books written about it in 2008, 2000, a lot of research, and even in the 90s. And so why now are they talking about it? But what I think could be interesting is that they might now have a kind of a smooth transition to these, microdosing therapies, or, some variation of weed. And I think they've really gone out of their way to normalize it. You're hearing so much in the culture of people talking about, everyday type usage of these types of drugs. And they also have patented some variations of weed, which is very interesting to me, because how can you patent something that's naturally occurring? That's not legally, that's not within the legal purview of a patent. So it doesn't make any sense. It's like antithetical to what a patent is. So I think that's kind of curious, and I'm wondering if that's going to happen with some of these other things too, like, some of the other psychedelics that they're talking about. I don't know. Sorry, that was a lot, but I think, to me, it does indicate that they're going in a direction for some sort of culture creation that would be very beneficial, like a Brave New World type scenario where people are kind of numbed out. And yeah.
Yeah, no, that definitely seems to be the situation. I always made the joke, and I've never smoked weed in my life, and I probably never will. I just, I can't stand the smell of it. I know so many kids that literally, I would say, smoke themselves retarded, where all they freaking did was smoke weed, and they would tell you about it all the time. And then, of course, the first thing they say is, "Oh, I know tons of successful people who smoke weed." Okay, well then, why? What's your excuse? And a lot of these people were fucking really bummy fucking people. So I almost kind of wonder if this is by design, because back in 2020, when you had, I think it was, or not 2020, but Rachel, your guess, if that's the one I'm referring to correctly, she was talking about how Pornhub was giving out free subscriptions to people. And this sounds so bizarre at first, but then the way that she kind of teased it all out really made sense. So hopefully everyone checks out this or that episode, because it was really, really interesting.
She's awesome.
Yeah. So you have so many people, marijuana is like normalized now, right? And then there's tons of people that go on Joe Rogan and talk about doing ayahuasca in the woods, and that's getting normalized. And I still have a stigma to like pretty much all drugs. I mean, I still drink, not like, get completely shit faced, but I enjoy alcohol, right? But like, I don't know, when you see people just smoking weed to the point where they can't function, and then we're normalizing doing acid and shit like that. To me, I've heard people make the arguments that you've kind of seemed to rebut and push back against, like, hey, it may be helpful for PTSD. I'm sympathetic to that, but I think there is a downside to destigmatizing things like drugs or this, live and let live, free sex for everybody. This kind of hedonistic approach to pleasure in your life. I think there's severe downsides of that, because this kind of goes back to behavior, like we were talking about earlier, where it's basically people aren't able to delay gratification, basically wait for the greater good later on, and greater good and like literal, like you'll actually benefit from this.
When you bring up hedonistic, I mean, that was Brave New World, right? It was all pleasure driven. People opt in. And I think that it's really, so going back to the economy, this ties together, but I had sent this thing out. I know people got very upset because, I couldn't confirm the veracity of this transcript. To be fair, I'm not the only one sharing this. People have done YouTube videos on it. Somehow they don't get taken down, but anyway, I don't know if this is real, if it's not real. What I do know is the elite plans point in this direction. So I don't know if this particular instance of the transcript is actually those details are accurate. I have no idea. But my point in sharing it was not to say that this is, the gospel and that you should take this word for word. My point in sharing it was that they were talking about the global UBI. And I was saying that this is what they do. They make things so that it's enticing to opt in. And it is desire, pleasure driven. So they're creating a culture of people who, they're locked down, and then they tell them that, well, it'll be so convenient. Now you don't have to get up and get dressed, and you can play video games, and, then you can do work whenever you want. And so now they're going to convince people I think they're trying really hard to collapse the system so that people feel desperate. But then, hey, you can get a UBI and you won't have to work at all. And you can, just play the video games, and, you'll get an allowance essentially. And my message was really, do not opt in, because no matter how good this sounds, this is not going to be good. And even if you like that aspect of it, and to be fair, there are people who do not need any kind of incentive. They just think that that's a great way of life, and they'd be happy to opt in now. Even if you thought that, you have to understand that this is the first step for them to roll out the rest of their plans. But I wanted to bring that up because it is tied to when I was saying like Brave New World, it's very tied to this hedonistic, pleasure, desire driven incentives. And I think that's how they're able to. It's the same thing with the metaverse that they want to create, right? They do this through you're all and this is using the trauma-based mind control in order to then can break you down and condition you so that so that your desire for these things then become that much more heightened. We're now offering you this solution because you've been atomized. You are now isolated and disconnected. But hey, don't worry. We can give you this great tool that'll make you feel like you're connected, and you won't even have to go out there and battle your social anxiety. You can just sit in front of a screen and it's all going to come to you. And they talk about these, Facebook has like a patent on a wrist wearable that will read your mind. And of course they couch it so nicely, it's that, well, this way, if someone's paralyzed, they could still type. They don't have to type. It'll just read your thoughts. Well, I don't feel so great about Facebook reading my thoughts. Sorry.
Right.
I'd like to keep those in my head, you know. Yeah, a little privacy, please. But I'd like to be able to articulate them and, you know, work them through before I have them given over to some portal. Thank you very much. But that's what they do. So I think that you hit on something very very, very poignant and very powerful, because it is this hedonistic aspect that they're tapping into in order to create incentives for people to opt in. So it's not by force. People will opt in, and then it lays the foundation, and they're masters of incrementalism. So they little by little, and then they can execute more of their plans.
Right. So something interesting, and I'm always mentally going back and forth on this, but when you look at Trump in 2020 and how many stimulus checks he sent out and how proud he was,
Yeah.
and his base is supposed to be the kind of people that say, hey, you put in your day's work, you get a day's pay, and then you're
Right.
good, right?
Yeah.
I cannot tell you how many of those people, and I tell people all the time, I'm a freaking mechanic, right? I work on cars every single day. I bust my knuckles on wrenches and you name it, right?
Yeah.
These people were so excited to get their $1,400, right? As the people who work their ass off and want their Social Security because they put their time in, they put their money in. They were so excited for the stimulus checks to come around. So it kind of taps on what you were saying earlier, is that if sometimes it doesn't really matter who's doing the pulling of the strings, because people will still be all for it. And it's really scary to think, like, if we got to the point where there was a CBDC and they gave you your allowance and you could just go to your pod and sit in the metaverse and you can transcend your human being, right?
Yeah.
Then so many people would just go right along with it and wouldn't know what it was like to literally just walk outside their door, take their dog for a walk, or ever remember what it was like to be at a barbecue restaurant outside and smell the wood chips and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, no, totally. That is a really interesting point about, you would think that base is someone that would rally against it. And I mean, I definitely was not in favor of it, because
Right.
the sacrifice for the illusion that you were getting so much, and it really wasn't so much. And people would have made more if they were able to keep their businesses open and keep their jobs and continue to work. That would have been so much more than the crumbs that they were given in exchange. And the sacrifice that they had to make as a result, many people lost their jobs completely. Many people lost their businesses that they had, in some cases, taken generations to build up. Many people lost their lives. The suicide rates went up drastically. The abuse, both in terms of physical abuse as well as substance abuse, increased dramatically. So this was not a win-win for, a few hundred or $1,000 whatever dollars. That's really not worth the cost of what it was endured. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and to kind of tag along to that, when I listened to your conversation with Jay Dyer and James Lindsay, which was fantastic, and I was kind of mad. I was walking my dogs. And I'm like, man, I have so much stuff I want to take notes on. But the one thing that kind of
You can listen again.
right, fair enough. The one thing that kind of stuck with me and I had thought about is this kind of ties back to behavior. When it comes to the you'll own nothing, you'll be happy, right?
Mhm.
Everybody leases vehicles now. Okay, so why is
Mhm.
that significant? Because you don't
Yeah.
ever own the vehicle, right?
Yeah.
GM owns the vehicle, Ford owns the
Yeah.
vehicle, Mazda owns the vehicle.
Yeah.
You're just using it, and right, you still pay them exorbitant amounts of
Yep.
money. You never own it, and it's getting you kind of in the psychological idea where it's like, okay, well, I don't have to own this. Okay, so and you see all sorts of payment plans coming out, vendor financing through
Yeah.
everybody now. It really ties back to behavior and teaching people to be more consumers and
Yep.
be more hedonistic. And then once again, you don't own anything. At the end of the day, it's not your car, it's Ford's car.
I mean, I will argue that, even owning I mean, they want to make it so that everybody really rents and they don't even own homes. But even people who own homes, in a lot of ways, that's kind of an illusion. Think about the property taxes that people pay on their homes, right? What happens if you default on those property taxes? You lose your home, right? So essentially, the state owns your home. You're basically paying rent, in form of taxes to your home. I mean, I have a huge issue with property taxes, to be really honest. I don't think that they're in a lot of ways that's it's very at best unethical. And I think it's really problematic because that's essentially what it is. It gives you this illusion that you own your property, and you don't, because you have to pay these taxes on it, and you default. If you default, you lose it. And I know people who that's happened to, where they've, spent their whole lives, or in some cases, again, families, it was generation passed down, and then they lost their home because of the property taxes. So I think there's something very flawed about that, but it's essentially the culture they're trying to create, that you will own nothing, you be happy. And it is a culture of consumerism and an illusion that people feel like, when they lease a car, they don't think about that. Most people don't. I'm not going to speak for everyone, but a lot of people don't think about the fact they don't really own that car. In a way, it's even happened with our phones, right? The people just trade it in and the upgrades, and they're still paying off the plan, and they really never even own their phone. That's the and what it has become is it's not just consumerism, but it's this it's constant recyclability, so things don't have value. There's the quality of things has deteriorated so much as a result, because there's no need to. It's not meant to last. It's in a 5-year
throwaway.
Yeah, it's a planned obsolescence. And so why would you invest in making something substantial that has a planned obsolescence?
Yeah, it's really interesting. And now you see all these car companies coming out with extended warranties, because once again, if you don't own it, then who cares? You just trade it in within the next couple of years. So one idea that I was kind of kicking around since listening to a lot of your stuff this past week is, I do feel like getting back in touch with our bodies and doing resistance training and getting closer with our families and our collectives that are immediately near us and the people who are close to us is the best way to combat this. And it sounds a little naive and optimistic, but the thing about lifting weights, and I always think about this, is that it's always objective, right? It's yes or no.
I say that too.
Right. The 45-pound plates on the end of the bar, whenever you go to pick it up, it's either you do or you don't, right?
Totally.
That is objective. And then when you do it, you own that, right? That was your body overcoming struggle. And I think that's kind of what they want to take away from you, is your independence and your ability to say that you did something and that you own something.
Yeah.
Because then at that point, then you could just be kind of tied along, right? Once again, in the metaverse, consuming whatever. And then that kind of goes on to transhumanism, where you can transcend owning things and be something else. You can be whatever you want. But the fact is that we should want to be unique beings. And I'm not necessarily religious, although I'm starting to, I don't want to say change my mind on it, but it's something I kind of dance around a lot. It's not something I dug into a lot, but it's something always on my mind. We're blessed to be the individuals that we are. And your story, which you told on the first time you were on, is absolutely fascinating. I love when you tell it. And it's just really cool to hear that you had such kind of unique happenstances, and you wouldn't be here right now if it wasn't essentially for the circumstances you went through. But I mean, really, that's for all people, is that the circumstances you went through in your life kind of made you who you are today, right? My mom had cancer 3 times, and obviously I'd never wish that on her, but her overcoming that and seeing her dedication and work ethic through suffering that made me realize, okay, well, there's no reason for me not to kick as much ass as I possibly can.
Of course.
So, just kind of your thoughts on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I absolutely agree with all of that. I think that, for starters, they do want to take away any kind of solvency, any kind of independence, any type of merit. So they're, with like you said, I always say that as well. It's very concrete, it's very quantifiable, and you you pick up a weight or you don't, you make the lift, you don't. It's there's no middle ground there. And there's a huge sense of empowerment and accomplishment in getting to the place where you can do that. And that builds a foundation for you to take on other challenges. So I think they absolutely don't want that. They are trying to take away. All we have to do is look around us, and they're creating more incentive for people to be more and more sedentary, more unhealthy, and because that creates more dependency. That means they can come in with their solutions that somehow create more problems, and then they have more solutions for, and then the cycle just seems to perpetuate magically, and it just seems to magically work in their favor, very interestingly enough. But people get sicker and they get richer. So, that's definitely, I do believe, largely by design. I think in terms of, I always say we have a 1 in 400 trillion chance of being born. And I think that people really don't value life the way that they would if they understood that and knew what a miracle it was to be here. We are all a miracle. The odds of us being here are just really, really stacked against us. So I think that is, again, part of this culture creation. I think that they want to dehumanize and devalue life. I mean, they say it pretty clearly, we're the useless eaters and we need to be reduced. So that, I think, has permeated, though, unfortunately. And you bring up religion. I think regardless of whether you're a religious person or not, this persecution of religion and this dilution of a metaphysical or spiritual worldview has lent itself very much to a devaluing of life, because it makes things very materialistic. It puts things into a kind of concrete, literal, random, having no bigger context or meaning. And so that it's harder to feel or find a sense of purpose in that. It's harder to find. I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm not saying there aren't wonderful people who are very concrete materialists. I mean, there certainly are, and they're very happy people who, may have a strong moral code. But it's a much harder thing to do when you don't have that, because it's not transcendental. So what is it that you're aspiring to? What are you aspiring for? What gets you through the hardships that are inevitable? So, I always say that I think that we are all endowed with, I do think we're all unique, but we are all blessed with unique gifts. And I think it's incumbent upon each of us to discover those and harness those so that we can be of contribution. And I think that if we were all to do that, it would be a very beautiful kind of an ecosystem, that we balance each other out. We balance out our weaknesses, those strengths help to cultivate. And I think that it, again, if you have a more spiritual kind of worldview, then that is kind of by design. And I think there's a lot of evidence on that side, but that's my belief. So yeah.
Yeah. And like I said, it's been something that's just been on my mind a lot lately, because it does feel like we're almost in a spiritual battle. And
We are.
It ties to kind of like the abortion debate. And I like, just saying the word abortion has this derogatory notion to it. And you and I are both pro-life, but when you see how just polarizing this specific topic is,
Mhm.
it really kind of makes you think like, wow, it has to be by design, because it's just not a conversation you can have with people, because the way that I think you and I both look at it is, you're responsible for your actions and the consequences thereof, right? You voluntarily have sex with somebody, and then by undergoing that, you accept the potential consequences of that. And I think it actually, I didn't even think about this till right now, but it really benefits this ESG and the globalist worldview for people to have this responsibility taken away from them.
Oh yeah.
So when you make them pro-choice,
All responsibility.
right, then you're taking away their agency, which is once again key to making people not feel uniquely human.
Yeah, no, they want to take away personal responsibility because that's why the victimhood culture is so pervasive. That's absolutely by design. But more victimized people feel, the one more divisive they can be, and therefore, their divide and conquer game is in full force. But also, the more dependent they are because they're less empowered to take responsibility and to to move forward and take a positive action to improve their own lives, and as a result of doing that, then the lives of those around them. But in the abortion conversation is interesting because I think I had initially come at it from a very kind of logical perspective like that. I still agree with that, you take personal responsibility for your actions. Actions have consequences. And if you're old enough to engage in those actions, then you should be old enough to consider the consequences and to consider if those are consequences that may be something you want to take on. But I think it really does tie to the bigger spiritual battle because, this is when you look into the history of abortion, it was founded by eugenicists. Planned Parenthood was Margaret Sanger, Bill Gates' father. It was always designed to reduce the population. And when you look into the roots of it, they weren't shy about it. I mean, they wrote about it. So this is very clearly designed to reduce the population. And unfortunately, they were targeting very specific populations, which is why a lot of these Planned Parenthood clinics are in inner cities. This is not a coincidence. So the abortion conversation, and then when you learn that Roe v. Wade was predicated essentially on a lie, I now understand why it is that the left is always screaming about instances of rape. It never made sense to me. I'm like, it's just such a small percentage of the population. You don't make a law for the outlier. Like, this is, absolutely kind of absurd. It's actually ludicrous that that's their argument. And this is not to say I don't have compassion for somebody who might have been raped and had that experience. This is not about lack of compassion, but it's from the perspective of an argument. It is not a very sound argument because you're talking about such a rare instance. But now I understand that Roe I actually didn't know this, but Roe lied. She lied about being raped, and that was a large factor in the case. And she admitted it. She admitted on national television that she lied about being raped. She was never raped. So the whole Roe v. Wade was actually predicated largely on a lie. And I think if people knew that, they would have had not now because people have been so conditioned, but I think at the time they would have had a very different perspective on all of it. But it does really point to a very significant spiritual battle. I mean, the Satanic Temple is using it as a justification. They're saying that it is a ritual, a sacrifice for them. And according to the Religious Freedom Act of 1991, they're protected to have their religious ritualistic sacrifices, aka abortions, and so they're legally protected to do so under that. But the fact that the Satanic Temple is using that as an argument, I think is a pretty strong indication that we are in the midst of very deep spiritual battle. And I make the joke, not like a haha kind of joke, but you look at the you look in the Bible at the sacrifice to Moloch. Didn't work out so well for them back then. So, but it's a really great idea. We should try it again just for good measure, so I am joking, but, and not like, haha, I'm being kind of facetious, but I just think that it's such a strong indicator that this is a spiritual battle because that is what's coming. And I think, again, it's an indicator that we are winning because of all of the reversals. There was an interesting case in Kansas, though, but when I looked at the way that it was worded, it was so incredibly confusing. Like, wow, who worded this one? I mean, it was really hard to say when you said yes or no, which was the answer you vote for. You almost had no idea if you were voting pro-abortion, anti-abortion. But again, this also points to just the manipulation and distortion of language, too, because, they word it pro-choice. How is this pro-choice? That's like a euphemism. It's not. You're pro-abortion, which is pro-murder, and I really do think it is. And I think when and I know people feel differently than I do about it, and that's fine. But to me, why is it that when you kill a pregnant woman. If you shoot a pregnant woman, it's considered a double homicide. It's not considered a single homicide. Well, so how come in that case it's considered a life, but when they want to abort it, it's not a life? How is it that certain states right now are advocating for post-birth abortion? That is a life. Can we agree that once a child is born, they are a child that is a human life? So how are we still calling it an abortion? I think this is I think it's very significant, just the manipulation of language. This is where it becomes very Orwellian or, postmodernist philosophy, Derrida. Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely true. And my a couple of my friends who are pretty religious, they say people act as demons, and they say, well, not literal demons, but if they were demons, is there any discernible difference for a lot of these people?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's also a really interesting point too, because when we were talking back about like the psychedelics and I do think there really is a spiritual battle currently, and you don't have to be religious to acknowledge that other people worship Satan, other people worship Lucifer, other people believe and worship dark forces. So you yourself don't have to be seeped in a spiritual worldview to acknowledge that other people do and other people are. So and that's like, you had brought up ayahuasca. And again, not to say that nobody's ever had a positive experience from it. There certainly are people, and there are people who worked with the therapists and had, healing experiences from it even. But you're opening things up, and we know so little about, we are three-dimensional beings. I often talk about how I have spent an inordinate, embarrassing amount of time trying to fathom a tesseract. It is not possible. I'm a three-dimensional being. I cannot fathom what a tesseract is. I've stared at simulations online. As a kid, I used to just fantasize about it. I really can't, though. I can kind of intellectualize maybe, but I can't fathom it. And that's because I'm a three-dimensional being. I know the probably the more attainable, digestible example for people is the Flatlanders. That's the two-dimensional beings in a three-dimensional world, because we live in a three-dimensional world. But I actually really tried to understand the Tesseract. So I say this just to say that we don't have much of an understanding about dimensions beyond what we know. I mean, there's so much that we don't know, and it's entirely possible that there are dimensions far beyond our understanding, and that there are beings who, either are interdimensional or that they are capable of crossing dimensions. And if that's the case, you're opening up channels, you're opening up portals that create that possibility. I'm not saying that that this is fact. I'm just saying this is entirely possible when we don't know enough to confirm or deny. And so, these rituals and sacrifices that are made, and we have concrete evidence that they do ritual, sacrifices, these spiritual kinds of practices, like in some cases it could be psychedelics, it could be portals that's CERN is opening, or we don't know. But I do think we're in the midst of a spiritual battle, and it's entirely possible that there are dark forces at play. But the converse to that is that it's very possible there are light forces opposing it as well. That would imply the battle, right? It is good versus evil. So
yeah, it's really hard for me to kind of look at everything that's going on in the world and get the not beyond a 50,000 foot view, but the whole Earth view of what's the totality of our situation. Because most people want to say everything's getting better consistently, right? But it's not necessarily a linear thing, right? Or at least I don't think it is. There's probably dips, and then dramatic dips, and there's dramatic rises. It's so hard to say how it's exactly playing out. I just want to go back to the abortion conversation for a second and kind of get your ideas on this. So I put out a podcast called The Most Sexist Podcast Ever. And basically, it was just elaborating on the idea that the reason why abortion needs to be such a hot button topic is because it really mobilizes women, right? It's a very emotional issue for women, because you can tell them that these men are controlling you
Mhm.
and they're controlling your bodily autonomy, right? And that gets people to their freaking core, because you're basically, these people understand this as culturally that a man is telling you what you can or cannot do with your
Mhm.
physical body, right? And this is so
Mhm.
deep in our culture that it's going to take years to kind of undo this mentality.
Mhm.
What do you think about the abortion debate when it comes to being a tool to get women to comply with certain desires?
I mean, I think that is, it's a lot of manipulation. And I do think I agree with you. I think that it is very intentional, and it is designed to victimize and mobilize women. I think that's a huge part of, because they want to get the vote. I think that's a large part of it. This is a very politicized topic, and it is a way to mobilize women who otherwise might not be politically engaged.
Yeah, I'm
And I
sorry to
think that's a
interrupt real quick, but
yeah.
women are actually the largest voting bloc in the United States. I forgot to add that part on, but that's part of the reason why I think it's such a pressing issue, is because they're the largest voting bloc in the United States. So I'm sorry.
Yeah, but there are a lot of women who otherwise might not be mobilized to
Right.
vote.
Mhm.
And this will engage a lot of women because they're being conditioned to be victims and being led to believe that somehow this is the evil patriarchy that is oppressing them, when really they took action and they were consensual in this action. There are consequences for this action. I think it's also a way to again, divide and conquer, because they really shut men out of this conversation. And men are, last time I checked, it requires a man and a woman to have a child. So I'm not a biologist, so don't quote me on this.
Oh,
But
you got it. Damn it, I was gonna say it.
but if I remember my biology class correctly, that is what I was taught. So I do believe that is how that works, and therefore I think that men are 50% of the equation, and therefore they should be absolutely involved in the conversation. But they don't want men involved in the conversation because they want to divide the family. This is about that's a large part of what the eugenics movement was all about. The abortion movement was all about. They really want to divide the family and destroy the family. If you had parents, the mother and the father having this conversation, I think you would have a lot less single parents, and you would actually see a lot more stability in families, because it would be a team having this discussion and preparing for how do they handle this. But I think that it is very intentional to shut men out of this conversation. That is what they want, and they want to create these tensions and animosity, and can convince people that, convince the women that the men hate them and just want to control them and manipulate them, and convince the men that they shouldn't be involved in this, and that women are just victims, and then women can just railroad them, make all the decisions as if they had no part in it. So they're trying to turn them against each other, and I think they largely do that with this argument. That there's so many facets at play with this. I think it is. I think it's really evil. It's a very dark, sinister kind of thing when you really think about it. And that's not to say that there's never an example where, you might have compassion for a person, but that's not what this bigger agenda is about.
Mhm.
This agenda is not about, the one person who, may have had a really complicated case. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about trying to really destroy the family, trying to depopulate, trying to mobilize a whole voting bloc over an issue that they've conflated. I've seen these man on the street interviews where you're talking to women who are arguing. They're flat out arguing for the right to be able to kill their babies after it's born, and how that's so liberating. I'm really not sure what's liberating about murder. I don't really know how they feel empowered by this, because I can guarantee most of those women, if they were to really go through with that, are going to, the consequences later, when they really think about what they've done, or it's not going to benefit their lives. They're not going to be enhanced by that. They're certainly not going to be empowered by it. So
Yeah, and I think what's more liberating and kind of fulfilling for people in general is having a family and
Mhm.
enjoying your life and being able to say that you achieve this and that you raise great individuals. And obviously I can't speak to that personally, but I see the way my dad, my mom feel about how my brother and I and our siblings
Mhm.
kind of turned out, and they seem pretty proud. And
Yeah.
not to say that I'm like the greatest citizen in the world, but I think at 28 I'm doing relatively
I think you're
okay.
doing pretty well. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah, absolutely.
I really
I
appreciate
can see
that.
your parents would be very proud of you. Absolutely.
Well, yeah, no, I appreciate that. I'm beyond blessed to have both in my life. So I
I
guess
think it's a
go
big
ahead.
lie of the feminist movement to try and teach women that they're better off having careers, they're better off staying
Yes.
single,
Hmm.
that raising a family is not an honorable job,
Right.
tending to the home is not honorable. I really feel like it's actually a lie. This is not to say, I mean, I don't have children, I'm not married. This is not to say that I think that that's the life every woman needs to lead or live. But I will say that I really think it's a huge lie. And I personally feel like I fell for it. I really focused on career when I was younger. I really did fall for it. I don't think I was ever like a feminist per se,
Right.
but I fell into a lot of the propaganda that honestly I think it's a psyop. And
Yes.
I think I would have been much happier having gotten married really young, having a big family, homeschooling all of them, that I think I would have really actually been happier. That's not to say that, I'm not grateful for the things I'm doing now and for the life that I have. I absolutely am. And I'm very blessed. That's, it's not to be ungrateful for that, but I can speak firsthand that I do believe that I fell for this lie, and it's a big lie. And again, that's not because it's everyone's path, but I think so many women are being misled into thinking that, having a family and tending to the home is not an honorable thing, that they should be, somehow, there are some women who do both and they do wonderful, they master both of them very well, but it, it is biology and it is kind of how our species propagates. So
Mhm.
it's kind of pretty important.
Yeah, I agree completely. And I always say that I think the biggest lie is telling women they'd be happier working than raising families. And like you said, it's not to say that every woman needs to be in the kitchen cooking
No.
and raising kids, but it seems like it's not even in discussion anymore. Like now people just have kids and they throw them in daycare and then they grow up, and it's really sad to see, because not that my family's the perfect model, but I mean, I watched my mom and my dad, and they've been divorced since I was 5 years old.
Oh,
They took care of my dad's mom when she was
uh,
dying, right? To see that, I feel like that shouldn't be like a weird sight. That should be something that everybody knows, and
yeah.
that the grandparents can help take care of the children, the mother takes care of the children. It should be a very tight collective, and it's really heartbreaking.
Intergenerational living. Yeah.
Right. It's
Yeah.
really shitty to see that this has been taken away from people.
I think so too. And a lot of that really did change too with kids being parents having kids much later.
Yeah.
So it made a lot of sense to have intergenerational living when people were having children much younger, because they were essentially kids themselves, right? And
Right.
then their parents would, yeah. And so the grandparents would be very involved and help out. And then it creates this extended family that is essentially, you know, a very close extension of the immediate family.
Mhm.
And that lends itself very well to, as the grandparents get older and the parents and the grandkids are able to assist and return the favor and take care of them. And it also, I think this is also the misconception, and it's a lie really, because people think that it creates a burden, but I think the burden is actually lessened because you already have this intergenerational foundation that has been built. So it really becomes just more of it's a system. And I don't mean to, uh, you know, uh, dehumanize it. That's not my intention, but it really is, because it's this interpersonal and interplay of how they live. And so I actually think the burden becomes decreased, not increased as a result.
Yeah, I completely agree.
It's much harder. I think, just to clarify my point, like, it's much harder to then try and recreate that when you've been all living apart and doing your separate thing. Now you're immersed in your own lives, and you become accustomed to your way of life, and that everything gets disrupted to then go and take care of somebody else. So in that situation, of course, people think it's a burden. I'm not saying it is, but you're much more likely to perceive it that way than if you all already had this intergenerational lifestyle that was already laid out.
Right. And it's, people will make fun of me and say I'm like some insane social conservative for saying this, but I really do think that is the way. I don't want to say forward, but I think that's the best way for people to be happy and to survive, because we saw in 2020 grandparents were crushed when they couldn't go see their grandkids, and people were denied going to see funerals for people. I mean, that is as evil gets, when you cannot go see people who really, they don't have anything else to look forward to other than seeing their kids and their grandkids when it comes to the end of their life, and then that was taken away from them. Like, think about how many people just died alone, and I can't imagine anything worse than that.
It's awful, really awful. No, I absolutely agree. That was really just gut-wrenching.
Well, let's kind of end it here on a bright note. Courtney, what do you do to kind of deload and de-stress? Because I had a buddy of mine who tagged me on Twitter. He said he was having some back pains, and I told him, well, why don't you try like a deload week of training? Because I mean, I lift pretty hard, and I don't know if I injured my back, but my back was feeling pretty screwed up.
Oh, no.
I'm kind of reassessing the way I deadlift and how much I deadlift, and it feels pretty good now, but I'd take a couple weeks off. But basically, I just kind of told him, like, look, why don't you just take a week where you go nice and easy? And then, like, he tagged me in the next week, and he was like, oh my God, I feel amazing thanks to you. And basically, the way I look at it is like, hey, sometimes you kind of have to relax and cool off so that we can spring forward with that much more effort. And that seemed to kind of be his situation. I know after I take a little bit of time off, it's the same way. So what do you do to kind of de-stress and deload and relax?
Well, I feel like they're different questions. I'll answer the deload first. Sure. I used to be like a go hard all the time, but really I prefer, like, really, I do this because I really love it, and I want to be able to do this till I'm 90. I want to be able to move and be able to move at a pretty high level. So I'm not focused on like maxing out these days, and like that's just because avoiding injury is pretty good for me. I prefer it. So I really don't do as much of that anymore. And the other thing that I do is, so it's twofold. One, I mean, I really listen to my body. So there are times where I'm really tired. I'm like, okay, I'm going to pull back. This isn't the time for me to redline. And if I'm feeling that way, I will just honor that. But I travel a lot, and I do, a lot of these conferences, and that's very high stress because they're not vacations. I mean, I'm grateful that I can do them, and I meet wonderful people, and I really enjoy it, but they're not vacations. And sometimes I will be able to drop into gyms at those times, but sometimes you're in conferences all day. You really can't. So I'll treat those as like deload kind of times. When I know I'm going to have that, oftentimes I'll go really hard before. I'll know I'll be really sore. And then I'll have a few days where, and it might even be a week, where I maybe only get in, 1 or 2 workouts, and maybe it's more just like a lot of walking or whatever, something that's really just a recovery week. And if I don't get that, the other thing that I do, and this is really more for the women who are listening, but I really pay attention to my cycle, and right before my cycle, I'm the weakest. I'm definitely more tired, but I'm also weaker. Like my numbers actually go down. If I were to try and do max lifts, like the, second week of my cycle and then the right before my period, the numbers are drastically going to be different, even if I've been consistently training. So I honor that, and I, take that as time to deload a bit. That doesn't mean that I don't train. It means that I don't necessarily redline those days. I don't try to hit max numbers because that's just going to be disappointing if I can't do it. And I'll be like, wait, what? And actually, when I didn't know, because I think a lot of women don't know, they don't work with their cycle. Most women are never taught to do that. I think it's becoming more common now, but you are actually stronger at certain parts of your cycle, and certain parts of your cycle are much more conducive to more of a cardio load or more high volume versus a higher strength or higher intensity, so forth, so on. So I didn't know, and I'd be like, what happened? There's no way I'm like this much weaker, like, why can't I lift this? So I think that's, just knowing that and paying attention to that and honoring that. But in terms of like de-stressing and relaxing, I'm not great at it. I'm honestly not. I love my aerial, which I'm going to be performing on October 15th. I'm going to be doing a speech and a performance. I'm actually speaking for an event, but I don't have all the details of that. And that is going to be, I believe it's the 4th to the 6th. It's a women's retreat that I'm going to be speaking at and possibly performing there as well. So I have a couple of those events. I really love that. That's it's still movement. It can be taxing, but it's much more kind of creative play. So that's a way of kind of de-stressing for me, spending time with people I enjoy and, kind of getting away in that regard. Or sometimes a lot of times, if I don't have that kind of luxury to do, an actual, I don't know, like a premeditated kind of de-stress, if you will, then I'm a big fan of walks. I do that a lot. So, right. Just get out. And I do that actually very often. So I'm at the desk a lot. I do a lot of sitting here podcasting. I'm at a screen. I read a lot. I listen to a lot. So sometimes that's just really de-stressing. I just get outside and go out, and even, hopefully the sun is shining, but even if it's not, it's actually really restorative just to be outside. And even if you can't be in, nature, just to see the trees and the flowers and, the nature, the creatures that are out and about, that's very relaxing for me, and it clears my head. So,
yeah, I think you hit on something really, really important right there. I think people underestimate just how important just getting outside for a walk is. And it doesn't have to be long, but like if I don't have that every single morning, and I couldn't tell you the last time I missed a walk, my dog just came running in very funny fashion.
Your dog's like,
yeah, conveniently when I say that. Every single morning I walk 2 out of the 3 of them. The one's real old, so she doesn't walk that much, but my day's completely thrown off, and I do it post meal to help with blood sugar control and then digestion issues, or it helps just my food digest. It's like my me time. Same with my resistance training. That's my me time. Like it's my time to just turn on whatever music I want to listen to. And like sometimes I try to listen to podcasts while working out. But
I do.
I can't.
Not while I work out, but while I walk, I listen.
Oh yeah, no. While I walk, but like if I'm working out, then it's like all my mental. Oh, of course.
All right, guys. I'm absolutely thrilled with the show's new sponsor. I am now sponsored and have an affiliate through LMNT electrolytes. I've used these electrolytes for years. Back when I used to do a lot of fasting, in fact, I used to drink sometimes I want to say up to 7 a day, 7 little packets. So the packets are full of all the electrolytes that you need to perform and hydrate yourself properly. You need sodium for pretty much every single function in your body, despite what a lot of people may tell you. Sodium doesn't actually cause a lot of the issues that people kind of would have you believe. So just real quick to give you a little bit of facts. You don't need sugar to hydrate. Electrolytes and water don't require glucose to pass through the gut. The average American consumes over 60 pounds of sugar a year. And when it comes to athletic performance, you can actually lose up to 7 grams per day and hot climate. So make sure you click on the affiliate link below to get all your hydration needs. And like I said, I'm super stoked to have these guys teamed up with the podcast, and just make sure you get your electrolytes through LMNT. All right, guys, thanks.
Right at the end.
You froze again.
There
you go.
Right. Yeah. All my mental focus when it comes to working out has to be on the lifts, and it has to
Yeah.
be right then and there. And whatever music's going to get me, whatever music I'm feeling that day, it's got to be on. I can't do podcasts and workouts just because it throws me off.
I don't. Yeah, I get distracted. I agree.
Yeah, I feel like I'm not giving enough respect to the people I'm listening to, and I can't absorb the ideas properly.
Sure.
So yeah, we've been shooting the shit for about an hour and a half now. I want to say I
Wow.
always enjoy talking to you.
Likewise.
It goes by really fast, and this your third appearance on here. We did a live together. It's cool to see you link up with Tommy as well, because he's such a great guy, and
he is. I have to bring him on. Yeah, well, definitely.
Tommy's just like one of the best people in the world. Him and I talk all the time.
Yeah, he's awesome. Really, really sweet, and so versed. Yeah, he's very well read. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad that the worlds are kind of coming together here, and hopefully more people, I guess, from my sphere reach out to you, because there's somebody in particular that I think that you would connect really well with, and I'll see if I can maybe either get you two on together, or you two could set something up, because I think you two have a very, very interesting perspective that you kind of run along the same lines. I think it would be really cool.
Cool.
Courtney, anything you got cool going on, or anything coming up in the future you want to tell people about?
Yeah, well, I will have the details soon, but I'm definitely going to be performing October 15th, and I'm actually in talks. I mean, it's a little bit preliminary, but we might partner up. Jay Dyer and I might both do speech, so that'll be October 15th if anybody is in the Middle Tennessee area. Yeah, so I have that, and then I have a couple of other events that I'll be speaking and performing in. So stay tuned into my social media, whatever I have that you can go to.
What's left of it.
And you'll find. But my website, CourtenayTurner.com, is Courtenay Turner. Should be out. It should be out next week, and that'll kind of be a main hub for everything. And I do have a Telegram channel, so I'm going to probably be a lot more active on there, since I don't know what it will be for me on Twitter. I might see if I can, resurface something, but I am on Truth Social. I am on Instagram. I'm pretty active on Instagram, but I think I have to be a little bit careful about what I can say and not say. But my stories, I tend to share quite a bit. So anybody who, and if you're on my Facebook, you can see those stories. They go up to Facebook as well. And I don't know what else is there. Yeah, so find me at the Courtenay Turner Podcast, and I'm pretty much everywhere except for YouTube.
Well, YouTube and Twitter now, unfortunately. Yeah. You're definitely sorely missed. But
thank you.
I'm glad I could at least have you here right now. If you don't have any other closing thoughts, we'll close her out.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for being here. I always enjoy talking with you. We'll have to do it again. You'll have to come back on my show.
Of course. Well, your invitation is always open here, and like I said, I always enjoy talking to you. So I guess we'll close her out then.
All right.
Thanks, Courtney.
Thank you.